Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Roland Roesch, who is Director of the Innovation and Technology Center of the International Renewable Energy Agency, where he oversees the agency's work on advising member countries in the area of technology status, roadmaps, energy planning, as well as cost and markets and various innovation policy frameworks. Dr. Roesch currently leads the agency's work on renewable energy innovation, grids assessments, as well as strategies for the power sector transformation, as well as for gas sector transformation, and actively leads the development of their work in areas like ocean energy, the blue economy, decarbonizing the shipping sector, among others. Prior to becoming director, Dr. Roesch served as the deputy director, but starting back in 2018. With a master's in industrial engineering and an MBA and PhD in energy economics from the Technical University of Darmstadt. Dr. Roesch joined IRENA back in 2012, has worked in multiple programs since. For 2 years prior to joining, he was a professor of energy economics at the University of Applied Science at Darmstadt and previously worked for 15 years in the oil and gas and utilities industries at places like Shell, Aon, laterally as general manager with Shell and head of division, project leader, project executive, and technical project developer with Aon. A lot of really interesting themes to get into today. And just, for our audience, the International Renewable Energy Agency is a global intergovernmental agency focused on energy transformation, and that ultimately serves as a platform for various countries to support their transitions, and is sort of has a broad purview across areas like bioenergy, geothermal, hydropower, ocean, solar, and wind. A lot to get into. Very exciting set of topics. Dr. Roland Roesch, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much, Ira. It is a pleasure to have the opportunity here for this podcast. And I'm very excited about your questions and the conversation we have in the coming hour. Thank you so much.
Excellent. No, it's delightful to have you. Would love to start off, as I typically do, by handing you the floor for a few minutes, just to further introduce you and your background to our audience. I'm always very intrigued, not just with how you started off, in engineering and why you were interested in energy economics, but a little bit about how you transferred from non-renewables, spending the time that you spent in oil and gas and utilities into renewable energy. If you could tell us a little bit about your background story.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think since my school times, I was always excited about the topic of energy, and energy really thrilled me, and so that's why I decided to study also something that is having the two aspects, so the technology aspect, but also the economic aspect, and then the political aspect. So I studied industrial engineering at the University of Darmstadt, which has had these elements I just mentioned. So it was a very interdisciplinary curriculum at this university. aspects on the technical aspects of energy, the economic aspects of energy, but also the political dimension. And after my studies, I was so excited about the topic because it came up during the study time, climate change and fossil fuel use in energy systems and the increasing CO2 emissions and the impact the CO2 emissions have on the climate and of course the climate impact to the world. And I decided to do a PhD thesis at that time, let's say with the Rio de Janeiro conference, the first conference that really addressed the topic of climate in 1990. And then thereafter, the first climate conferences started, and in 1996 we had the Kyoto conference, so the first conference of the party, which came up with the first results and mechanisms to decarbonize the global energy system and also the other sectors of the economy. And there, let's say, a lot of people may remember the Kyoto Protocol was about the so-called Kyoto mechanisms, which was the global CO2 emission trading, but then also two mechanisms under let's say they are known as joint implementation and also the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. And I decided to write my thesis on this aspect. So the idea, how can developing countries and developed countries cooperate together to take advantages of the different cost levels for the mitigation of CO2 emissions. And I studied in depth, let's say, all the aspect of these flexible mechanisms. And let's say in this time of my thesis, it was very clear that there is a lot of transaction costs related to this, no, with the additionality perspective and saying, okay, developed countries cannot reduce the CO2 emission in the developing countries if the investments in these mitigation measures are not additional. And also there was a very complex regulatory frame in place that looked in how this emission can be traded and to which account this CO2 emission reductions would go. And let's say that was very clear. There was an approach in over-regulating these mechanisms, which led to extremely high transaction costs. And actually, the mechanisms didn't work as expected to achieve this. And let's say if you look back, what were the reasons for this? It was very clear. There were kind of common and divided or common and different responsibilities between developing countries and developed countries to reduce this CO2 emissions. But at the end, it was a fight around the cake and saying, okay, there is the global CO2 emissions that are at that time were something like 35 gigatons of CO2 emission per year. And how can this be reduced? And let's say the use of these emissions, if one country was using them, they were not available anymore for other countries, which kind of created big investment and financial flows on the one side to compensate one country, to compensate the other, which was one problem there. But the key problem was it was all a fight around costs and not about opportunity. And as we see it now, how the climate and let's say that about the Kyoto Protocol, that was the COP3. We are now entering COP29 in Azerbaijan and then COP30 in Brazil. This is many years and actually at the time of the Kyoto Protocol, the renewable energy technology still very costly. They needed subsidies to make them happen. And they were not really considered a strong solution to the plan. And actually, with the 21 in Paris, it became very clear that innovation, technology, and specifically renewable energy technologies have become a very important part of this equation in how to mitigate climate change. And this is a very interesting opportunity. And now I work since 2012. I work for the International Renewable Energy Agency, which basically has the mandate to be the global energy transition agency. And we help with our membership of currently 169 member countries and 15 countries in accession to IRENA. We help to implement and accelerate the implementation of renewable energies in those countries. And as you said before, looking into bioenergy, geothermal energy, hydropower, ocean energy, and most important, solar energy and wind energy to implement in the member countries these renewable energies, and that brings opportunities to the table, which is most interesting for most countries. So at the very beginning, when I started to work for IRENA, there were still subsidies needed for many of these renewable energy sources and the related technologies. But now, since about 2080, the global capacity additions related to renewable energies were higher than the capacity additions investments into fossil fuels. And the reason for this is it's not only about the political case to mitigate climate change, as explained, it is now also a business opportunity. So the cost competitive of the renewable energies beating fossil fuels and also nuclear in their cost in being more competitive, cost competitive, being a cheaper alternative for the implementation of the energy system to harvest energy is a completely change of the equation. And we have a business case now, as I said, and the opportunity also to beat climate change with the investments in taking advantage of this very cost competitive renewable energies.
And Roland, say just a couple words about the organization, and we'll get into the Innovation and Technology Center in a bit. But you joined in 2012. I believe the organization was founded in 2009. Statute entered into 2010. Headquartered in Masdar City in Abu Dhabi. United Nations observer. Take us back to the couple of years before
Yes.
you arrived there, because a
I
lot
think
happened.
yes, a lot happened since then. I think the German government started to explore the opportunity that the world needs an international organization that works also on renewable energies. At that time, well established, and they even received the Nobel Prize, was the International Atomic Energy Agency. And as a result of the energy crisis in the 70s, so 50 years ago, the International Energy Agency was founded to mainly help the developed countries of the world to manage their energy resources and to find ways to deploy their energy system, mainly with nuclear and also with fossil fuels. But there was not really an energy agency that looked into the most let's say, sustainable way of energy, and also the, let's say, the resource that is sustainable, available from the sun, in taking advantage of the sun, of wind, of the movement of waves and the tidal effects, and also the geothermal capacity of the earth to produce energy in a sustainable way. And this has been taken forward very easy, very after the Germans started to explore the opportunity to set up such an international organization. 60 countries were prepared to support such an international organization. And there was, as you said already, in 2010, there was an important conference in Bonn, which was basically the initiating conference for setting up this international organization for renewable energies. Then there was a very important conference in Taba, where it was decided and discussed, let's say, to found this renewable energy agency finally. And it was discussed who would be, let's say, where would this international organization be headquartered. It has been decided that this will be in the United Arab Emirates, but also it was discussed at that conference that an innovation and technology center of IRENA could be set up in Europe, in Germany, to kind of complement as one division the divisions, let's say, related to the financing and knowledge, but also in the political setup, the liaison and the political convening of the assembly, as we call it, so, and the council meetings of IRENA, the constitutional gremiums of IRENA in Abu Dhabi. There was this idea to set up the Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn. Today, I'm the director of the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn. We have about 65 staff here working. We have about 10 interns and 15 consultants. So altogether, we have 100 staff working Innovation and Technology Center. In the other two content divisions and the Global Support Office and the administrative office and the office of the Director General in Abu Dhabi, we have 260 staff working. And the current Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency is Francesco La Camera, an Italian citizen. He is now in his 5th year as the IRENA Director General. And yeah, we have had a very good development of our membership. I think IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, is probably and was, I have to say, was now the fastest growing international organization globally, as we were ramping up our membership with about 60 countries that were the countries when the inauguration was of IRENA in the Petersberg in Bonn. We were able to ramp it up to 169 countries now. We have 15 more countries in accession to IRENA. All the important players in energy are already members of IRENA, and Brazil is in accession to IRENA, which is kind of the last really big country that is a very important player with the biomethanol, but also with their activities in energy, that is probably and hopefully going to join soon IRENA, which gives us an almost complete coverage of the countries of the world with whom we work on these activities related to renewable energies and the global energy transition.
And IRENA, puts out, quite a few very complex reports on sort of the landscape. And, the February 2019, your organization published Innovation Landscape for a Renewable Powered Future. In this report, you introduced this really sort of overarching theme known as systemic innovation, where basically you highlight, look, these innovations don't happen in isolation, and I could solve the renewable energy problem with whatever, coconuts or seaweed or whatever the case may be. But if I don't have the full system, the electrification technologies and the right market design and the business models and the cost structures, this stuff doesn't go anywhere. Talk about the theme, if you would, of systemic innovation and what it means for your Innovation and Technology Center.
Yes. I think that is a very important topic. Let's say in the first years of the organization, we had a very strong focus on the power sector and how we can deliver electricity generation coming from a renewable power. No? And as I said at the very beginning, there were also subsidies needed, and we had to create awareness of the possibility to generate renewable energy generated power. But let's say very fast, we basically achieved to bring down the cost of the renewable energy technology. And then let's say other topic came into the focus, which was renewable energy technologies are not always available. There is a certain variability, So for many renewable energy technologies like solar, the sun is not always shining. For wind, the wind is not always blowing. Also for ocean energy, the waves are not always moving. And let's say that leads into a situation where you have a variability of the renewable energy technologies that makes them not always available when they are needed. And basically to deal with this variability, of course, people think of electricity storage coming from renewable energy technologies at that time in terms of cost, and the only feasible, really cost competitive way in store electricity was hydropower pump storage. And but hydropower pump storage has very specific requirements that you can implement it. No, so you need a difference in height. You need the water resources. You need the facility to pump it, and this has to be close where the renewable energy generation takes place. But let's say with the development of the digitalization, a lot more opportunities came into play to take advantage of the mechanisms of the innovation perspectives. No, let's say it is on the one hand the technologies we mentioned: pump storage, battery, the operation of transmission grids, the operation of distribution grids, to put storage in the right places. But also, let's say, renewable energy is a distributed form of energy. So in the past, you basically had nuclear power plants, you had coal power plants, you had gas power plants. This was a very central way of operating and producing energy. And let's say this central way was, you had a nuclear power plant of 1,000 megawatt, or a combined gas cycle gas turbine power plant of 800 megawatts. You have then the supply chain and the supply with gas and nuclear fuels to use them. And that means then from a central point of view, you have to distribute the electricity through transmission lines. You bring them then to the distribution lines, and you apply it to the households as they need it. So that was a very established way in doing it. And the only part of the variability was basically the supply of fuels and organizing the infrastructure that the fuels are there, let's say from coal, gas, and nuclear, and the system worked. But then renewable energy technologies are a distributed way. So that means the renewable energy generators are much smaller, specifically at the beginning. A megawatt of a wind energy turbine would have been already a very big wind generator. And then you have many of them, and they are distributed in different places where the wind blows best. And also the idea to bring them into the distribution system made it a variable distributed form of energy that is not always available, which require then to look into innovations that are available to take advantage of this distributed renewable energy system. And there digitalization comes into play in bringing in tariffs and a system that can quickly respond depending on the demand. So demand response systems came into play, and those demand response systems, they need differently to the fossil fuel driven system, and a flow of electrons from the one side, but also a flow of bits from the other side to provide the information where the electricity is needed, and basically to make sure that also the consumer is not just saying, I need the electricity now. Also the consumer had to become a prosumer to act more smart in the system. And let's say this development has entered into a system where you have to look not into in technology innovation also, let's say looking at the best technology of the generators and make them cost effective. You also need to look into the innovation of the enabling technologies. So let's say, what are the best grids to transport it? What is the best grid structure to bring the digitalization into the grid system, implement the storage in a cheap and effective way in the system, and make the consumer a prosumer, which then requires the enabling technologies and the innovation in these enabling technologies. But now, more important, it is not only about technology, it is about systemic innovation and the systemic use of these technologies. And this brings perspectives into play where you look also into the business models. And let's say, what are the new business models in helping the consumer not to be only a consumer anymore, to also be a prosumer, so an active consumer in the system, in the energy system, that has to act smart and do things smart without being always on his mobile to take active decisions. No? And this required business models of business players to come into the system that operate these systems in a smart way, to aggregate the distributed renewable generators to one virtual power plant, for instance, was a very important innovation. But also to have a link between the prosumer and the power market, and to put a system into place that allows the prosumer to consume the energies when the wind is blowing, when the sun is shining, and the electricity is cheap, so the variability of the tariffs, and then some business models that take advantage in consuming and let your washing machine run, and to use the electricity in your household and store it probably in your stationary battery at a good point, while you have on your rooftop a solar PV and perhaps a small wind generator that produces electricity, that feeds back this electricity into the power system, and that uses the electro vehicle that you have in front of your house, and that fills your stationary battery with these business models. And then, of course, the payments of all this, and not making all the time these payments, also required blockchain as being an opportunity to make payments as you consume, as you produce, and feedback the electricity in the system that is then differently to the system. The former system with conventional energy is built up from the bottom and uses the system from the household, from the production in your household, up to the distribution level, feeding in the electricity in the houses of your neighbor, knowing a little bit who produces and who consumes, and then only go up to the transmission system to bring back the electricity to the bigger system. And this requires also, and there we are back to systemic innovation, not only the renewable energy technology, not only the enabling technologies, and not only the business model. This requires innovative ideas also on the regulation.
Right.
So the regulator and the operation of the system, so the transmission system operators and the transmission system operators and the regulators and the market design have to become a proactive part of this new energy system. And actually, while we have the technology, while we have a lot of business model, and while the transmission operators and the distribution system operators are already super active and they implement the innovative ideas in sandboxes or roll out already innovative ideas, we have some challenges with the regulators. So the regulators are very careful. And for good reasons, they are very careful. No, they have the responsibility, together with the policymakers and the market design, to keep the lights switched on. And they are very prudent and very risk averse in bringing in new mechanisms of regulation into the system that allows all these aspects. And in this first IRENA Innovation Landscape report you have just mentioned, we basically outline 30 innovations that need to come into this, this machine of systemic innovation that looks into a comprehensive, integrated way in bringing technology innovation, enabling technologies, business model, the operation of the systems, and also the innovation in market design and regulatory together to operate the systems in a new way. We have, and if you allow a little bit more on this,
please.
We've launched the second innovation landscape report just last year, together with the European Commission on Energy, that were a partner for this report. We did this report together with all these stakeholders I already mentioned, the innovative companies, the transmission system operators, the distribution system operators, the manufacturers of battery storage, the operators of pump hydro storage. And we looked into operating a system that allows the renewable energy technology and the generation of renewable renewable energy technology sector,
Mm-hmm.
to decarbonize the so-called end-use sectors.
Okay.
And the end-use sectors is transport, heating and cooling, and
Mm-hmm.
the building sector, and the industry sector. And in this report, we look into the integration of the power sector with the heating and cooling sector, the transport sector, and the industry sector. And there is three things is key. So electromobility with electric cars, and also batteries for using electromobility for freight, heavy
Yep.
load freight. Also the decarbonization of the end-use sector to produce the so-called e-fuels, ammonia and methanol as derivatives of hydrogen via water electrolyzers,
Mm-hmm.
and also using renewable energies to provide with geothermal, but also with solar thermal heat, and also to mention heat pumps as providing heating and cooling in the industry sector was the part of this second landscape report, and make an integrated system that combines the renewable power sector with those sectors, and taking advantage of full integration of electrolyzers, heat pumps, electro vehicle, and this other heating and cooling systems I just mentioned.
Excellent. Oh, really excellent. It's an extremely elegant, connection, and I obviously, as you were just saying, this systemic innovation topic it is about progress that has to occur across all these different actors in the system. So no, I really appreciate you, Roland, laying that out. With that, I'd love to sort of dive now a little deeper into some of the specific examples, both per country transition, but also industrial transition. And I thought a very interesting place to go would be to your 2020 December report entitled "Fostering a Blue Economy." And it's very interesting because last year, right, no, it was a little before that, right following COP27, I hosted President Saranjal Whips on the show from Palau. And, the major theme back then was, small island developing states, lesser developed countries. And, we talked about, okay, there is this amazing blue resource known as the ocean. It has a tremendous amount of power. As you pointed out, it gets a lot of solar radiation. It's got a lot of wind. And then when we circulate back, right? I mean, we want to desalinate that water. We want to have aquaculture. There's a bunch of important things that sort of byproducts also that come out of the ocean aside from energy. Talk a little bit about the principle of the blue economy as you look at it, IRENA, and then connecting in what you were just talking about per the systemic innovation model.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this question. We have to clearly see the oceans, and let's say apart from tidal energy, the movement of waves, the movement of waves, so wave energy, but then also the salinity gradient, so the salt concentration difference between different surfaces of the sea, but also the temperature differences between the ground of the sea and the surface that it is warmed up by the sea, offers a tremendous potential of renewable energies that would be easily, let's say, to harvest, and it could supply the entire global demand of the world. So it would be 2,000 times more energy as we would need. The problem is that ocean energy technologies by now play, compared to solar and wind, a reduced role. And let's say the chunk of the implementation of ocean energy technologies comes from tidal energy. So taking, let's say, advantage of the movement of the sea, so the high sea and the low sea, as it is impacted by the gravitation of the moon. And let's say there are two plants, one in France and one in Korea, in place, which basically brings up the biggest part of ocean energy technology. But in the past years, also wave energy converters have caught up. The thing is that wave energy, salinity gradient, and ocean thermal energy conversion still have issues in terms of these technologies are in the water already. They are also operated, but the costs are not competitive to the established renewable energy technologies. So let's say solar and wind are still in places cheaper options as ocean energy technologies. And it is here we need a push, a good idea and support, bring the ocean energy technologies from the demonstration phase stronger to the commercial phase and scaling up these technologies to a level that they are competitive. It is very clear this is going to happen, but clearly an emphasis in the implementation is on solar and wind.
Wonderful, Roland. I appreciate that input, and it's very interesting how you mention wind, because obviously a major program for you, well, not just global wind energy, but this global offshore wind alliance that was founded by IRENA in collaboration with Denmark and the Global Wind Energy Council, several countries involved from sort of all over the face of the earth, including the United States. And here I am on the East Coast of the United States, a lot of discussion here about global offshore wind. Talk a little bit about GOWA, if you would, and a little bit of what's been involved in that particular initiative at IRENA.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ira. Indeed, IRENA, in its World Energy Transition Outlook, sees offshore wind as a key technology for the energy transition, because also global offshore wind provides a base load, which is extremely important to supply the energy transition in a country. And let's say in this World Energy Transition Outlook see that there is a potential for offshore wind, which is at least 2,000 gigawatt by 2050. And if you look of what has been achieved, so according to IRENA's latest renewable energy statistics reports of global offshore wind, we see that the wind capacity has reached 63 gigawatt, mostly in Asia, 50%, 60% in Asia, 40% in China of this implementation. And as global offshore wind is so important, we actually have founded, together with the government of Denmark and with the Global Wind Energy Council, an initiative which supports to achieve this potential of offshore wind. We kind of really took as a first approach here to make sure we get together with this Global Offshore Wind Alliance 380 gigawatt of offshore wind really into the water to come closer to what the potential we see of 2,000 gigawatts by 2050. This initiative has been launched basically at the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. And since then, we have been very happy that more than 36 countries kind of became member countries of the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. The idea is that the Global Offshore Wind Alliance looks really into the challenges that renewable energy projects have, and how this can be overcome. And I think this is very clear. You need the political support, so you need the countries that are, let's say, have coasts and that have already targets for offshore wind and how they can achieve these targets. You need the private sector in the discussion to understand what are the challenges of the private sector to implement offshore wind projects. And of course, you need the finance sector on board and seeing how this implementation of offshore wind can be financed. And let's say with having the key stakeholders together, this allows you in different places in the world to discuss the concrete challenges and to come up with solutions how to overcome the bottlenecks and the difficulties that are barriers to the implementation of offshore wind. I think the permitting process is very often a challenge that needs to be overcome. Supply chains for offshore wind and having the equipment, the ships, the cables, and the technologies available that you need to implement offshore wind, but then also related risks to offshore wind that are seen by the finance sector, and basically to find a mechanism to mitigate these risks for the financing is a key objective of the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. And what we do, we basically have set up this initiative with 36 members. And we are now in the process on setting up a secretariat that kind of manages the Global Offshore Wind Alliance and basically supports to organize meetings, to produce knowledge products, and also to have and organize best practice exchange between countries, the private sector and the finance sector, to really get offshore wind projects into the water. I think we have seen already results that are kind of related to what we discussed in Goa. So the Ostende agreement, where we kind of discussed, and several members of the Global Offshore Wind Alliance agreed basically on the North Sea coast to cooperate in across borders to set up ambitious targets for renewable energies, which is in this case to implement 60 gigawatt of offshore wind. Is already kind of a first result you may see coming from the Global Offshore Wind Alliance. And of course, there is still some work to be done. As said, we are in the process to set up a secretariat, and we have high hopes that this best practice sharing can be deployed further, and that we are able to come closer to the target that we have set for the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, the 380 gigawatts, and then, let's say, towards 2050 to achieve the 2000 gigawatts. One changer could be the floating offshore wind. We see, according to the latest IRENA cost analysis, that the levelized cost of energy for offshore wind fell 60% between 2010 to 2021. So, and concretely in figures, that means from basically 18.8 US dollar cent per kilowatt hour. The costs have fallen to 7.5 US dollar cent per kilowatt hour. Say the costs of floating offshore wind are at the moment, with levelized cost of energy, at 200 US dollar per megawatt hour. Till 2030, we will see that it will be half. So it will go to 100 US dollar per megawatt hour. And we see a potential that it will go by 2050 to about 40 US dollar per megawatt hour.
Okay. Okay.
We see at the moment that there are 130 megawatts of floating offshore wind is operational. In Europe, we see that have had to award 10 gigawatt of development rights in 2023, most confined to the demonstration phase. There's also, I think we see in the UK 6.2 gigawatt of floating offshore wind. France is also implementing 250 megawatt in Brittany. Norway is having 1.5 gigawatt of floating set up. And yeah, offshore to account for 40% of wind production in 2050, and floating offshore wind is expected to contribute 50% of all offshore wind, with 264 gigawatts by 2050. So you see, the floating offshore wind really is a technology that can become a deal breaker in areas where you cannot implement fixed foundations for offshore wind. Also, we have just done under the G7 presidency of Japan a report on floating offshore wind, mainly with the interest to reduce the environmental impact of offshore wind, specifically to fishery and coast fisheries, where also floating offshore wind can help to reduce the impact on the fishery, which is specifically very important in Japan, but also in other countries. And there we see that is floating offshore wind can have also advantages in less impacting the coast fisheries.
No, that's I was unaware until we chatted offline a bit about a floating offshore wind that was that was the sort of the next step in all this, because obviously a lot of the debate around here on the U.S. East Coast has been about the issues with the permanent structures. So it's very interesting to see that sort of innovation coming into play there. So it's going to be interesting looking forward to seeing what happens here specifically on how these different versions of the technology are greeted. So that's great to know. Roland, while we're still on the water and talking about wind for a minute, and we'll come back on shore here. Other thing we chatted about a bit offline, was this report that you were involved in. It was back in May 2022, entitled "Fueling the Fourth Propulsion Revolution." I know this was something that you were involved in regarding the International Chamber of Shipping and specifically shipping technologies, and this sort of the 3% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions that comes from that industry, but it feeds into the sort of the broader transportation sector, responsible for still about 20% of the world's carbon emissions. Could you sort of lay out a little bit of sort of IRENA strategy here, sort of broadly across transportation? Because I know a lot of the stuff that's happening in, let's say, the shipping sector, whether it's these giant sails or hydrogen or whatever some of the fancy things they're doing there, always not as easy to translate to cars and trucks. But talk a little bit about the continuum here of how you look at shipping in general, because it's a big chunk of that CO2.
Yeah, in our world energy transition outlook, we see that let's say about 12% of the decarbonization has to go through indirect electrification. Indirect electrification means to produce renewable energy-based power and use this in water electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. And this hydrogen kind of gives you different opportunities. You can use the hydrogen directly. You can produce derivatives of hydrogen. So for instance, you can add a nitrogen molecule, which gives you then ammonia, or you can add to the hydrogen a CO2 molecule, which gives you the opportunity then to produce methanol. And there is also a way that you can do and use the hydrogen for methanization. And then you can basically produce e-fuels like methane. That is very much the same as natural gas, no? So that can be used also in the process. Where do we use this hydrogen? You can produce via indirect electrification with water electrolyzers. There is a clear priority, because you can imagine to go from renewable energy to produce hydrogen, and then to go to the production of derivatives, ammonia, crack the ammonia again, and use then the hydrogen, is a very costly value chain. And that means specifically at the beginning, when you start to decarbonize these so-called hard-to-abate sectors, which entails steel making, using green hydrogen in the chemical sector, where you use now, let's say, gray hydrogen, which comes mainly from the cracking of methane. And you have also the transport sector, no, with the shipping sector and with aviation. And you already said, these ocean-going ships, they are super efficient. You can just see it, how well they are packed, and the engine they use. Also, the heavy sour fuel oils they are using, they are quite cheap. So it is a very efficient sector in a way, using a fuel which is carbon-based. And the entire shipping sector by now is kind of producing about 3% of the global CO2 emission. So something in the range of a country of CO2 emissions like Germany. And so there we see clearly a potential to do this. But while the use of green hydrogen needs to be prioritized, there is actually, at the moment, the project we see, they look into the decarbonization of steel, and using to reduce iron ore instead of coal, you basically use green hydrogen is a type of project we see. We see the use of green hydrogen in the chemical sector, and in the shipping sector, it is a little bit different. So let's say in IRENA, we see that about 69 million tons of green hydrogen will be needed by 2050. Of this 69 million tons of green hydrogen, we see that about 50% of this, let's say 25% of this will be traded. So there will be trade of green hydrogen. And the way of trading this will go mainly through pipelines, repurposed natural gas pipelines. And the other half of this will basically go through the shipping sector. And the shipping sector has an important role to transport the green hydrogen from places with high renewable energy resources, with low cost of producing green electricity, where you in an optimized way can produce the green hydrogen. To transport then this green hydrogen to the places where it can be used, you have to transport it via ships. And let's say why you organize them, and there is already, let's say, the transport of gray ammonia in some ports and harbors. You need to build up the infrastructure in the ports, and you need to transport the green hydrogen or the derivatives, the methanol, the ammonia. And while you do this at ports, and the shipping sector has a very important role in the transport, it is clear you have to build up the infrastructure in transporting this hydrogen, ammonia, methanol also to other sites where it is used. And that kind of creates a situation where the bunkering of green hydrogen and methanol and ammonia is a key part. And we see in the development of shipping engines that the development, and I think leading ship engine producers, they actually have engines available that can use the heavy fuel oils, that can use methanol, and that can also use ammonia. And in a way, we were entering into a situation where also these green fuels are available for the shipping sector, while the shipping sector has to handle these hydrogen-based fuels or e-fuels already. And let's say that opens also up to reduce the CO2 emissions in the shipping sector, let's say towards 2030. Also the shipping sector may take this opportunity to use these low carbon fuels, as I mentioned, derivatives of hydrogen or also e-fuels, to use it in their own engines. We see it already. Rotterdam, for instance, is a green port. They are already using, let's say, in the port battery ships, but they also considering to use green hydrogen in the ports itself to fuel some of the engines, and basically also to provide the fuels to the ocean-going ships. So you see, it is a long-term strategy where we cooperate strongly with the International Chamber of Shipping, but also the IMO has taken forward, let's say, a levy to reduce the CO2 emissions of the shipping sector. And there is also a net zero initiative that is basically led by the World Economic Forum and the Global Maritime Forum, where IRENA is an expert, an expert on these green fuels. And we basically provide the link here between the national plans that go along with a decarbonization strategy of the hard to abate sectors, as I mentioned, in steel, chemical, and other areas, and to make sure we link the national plans with the e-fuel and hydrogen-based fuel production in the ports and harbors, and also provide the opportunity here in the national plans to create green shipping routes that may come first, that provide as bunkering fuels these low carbon fuels I just mentioned.
And Roland, you mentioned steel a couple times there, and this is just one other industry I'd like to touch on while we have you today, because I'm sitting a couple hours east of United States Steel here in the U.S. Used to be something like the fifth or sixth largest steel company in the world. It's down a little bit, but there's an acquisition happening with Nippon Steel right now. I'm not exactly sure where that's all standing, because I know it's going through our government. But at the end of the day, a major industry, kind of dirty, 7% of global carbon dioxide emissions. You were involved in creating this circular steel report a little while ago. I think this one, IRENA collaborated with the India's Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change, and you've talked a little bit about things like, obviously, sustainable energy sources being used in industry, as in the case of transport. Talk about circular steel a little bit, because here, again, it's much more than just the energy sources. It's recycling, it's proper raw material use, it's reductants. There's a lot of things that happen in the steel creation process. Give us your vision for circular steel, if you would, IRENA.
Yeah, the demand for steel has been growing relatively steadily following economic progress, particularly in the stages of industrialization and the modernization of economies. The world consumes today approximately 2,000 million tons of steel. So this is 10 times more compared to 7 decades ago. But more importantly, it is 2 times more than just decades ago. So in the past 20 years, the steel demand has doubled. And much of the growth over the last couple of decades came from strong growth in emerging economies. And here important to mainly mention China. When we look at the projections of demand, also this projection may differ. You can see that in the next years we will see an increase of about 500 million tons per year to reach about 2,500 million tons a year by the mid of the century, so by 2050. Unfortunately, and this is why IRENA is involved here, unfortunately, most steel is produced today using fossil fuels as a source of energy and as reductant for the steel, if we kind of exclude here the opportunity of carbon capture storage. Mm-hmm. As you can see and understand, more than 2/3 of the global steel is produced using blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace routes, which run all on coal. So you use coal here and the heating of the furnaces and also the coal for the reduction of the iron ore. The direct reduction route has lower emissions, lower emission intensity, as it typically operates with natural gas. And as everybody knows, natural gas has less CO2 emissions than coal. But the lowest emission intensity is achieved today in so-called electric arc furnaces, which run on electricity to recycle steel scrap. This route accounts for about 1/5 of the global steel production. Okay. One key advantage of steel is that steel can be recycled. Yep. And in fact, steel scrap is routinely recycled in electric arc furnaces, as I just mentioned, as well as input to blast furnaces. This capacity to be recycled makes the steel sector a key enabler for the circular economy. And that is where we see a big part of the future, using and increasing the part of circularity in the steel sector. And because electric arc furnaces can be run also on renewable power, there we have a clear route towards a low carbon steel. So basically using scrap, doing the recycling, and using in the electric arc furnaces renewable power is a very important way of decarbonizing the steel sector. So what is the problem here? The problem is, of course, the availability of scrap. As scrap becomes available with a time lag of decades after entering into the economy. In a recent study IRENA did last year for the India's G presidency, we did an analysis of future availability of scrap and the implication for the decarbonization of the sector. So the recycling accounts today for about a third of the steel production. In our estimation, we could see this share growing up to 40–50%, depending here on the demand projections. So this means we will need primary steel production starting from iron ore for many decades to come. And that means that we need solutions to decarbonize those primary production routes. If I look at the key levers to reduce the environmental impact of the steel sector, I would like to mention here, first, we should explore ways of optimizing the use of steel where possible without compromising human progress, obviously. Second, minimize the need for primary steel production by maximizing scrap recycling as more scrap becomes available over time. Thirdly, we should make steel production processes as efficient as possible. And now all these solutions can make a substantial contribution towards sustainability, but they will not be sufficient to decarbonize the sector by mid-century. In the end, we need to deploy clean sources of energy and reducing agents so that the sector can truly decarbonize. And how to accelerate this transition towards clean production methods is the focus of what we discuss here. From an IRENA point, we think that renewables will play a central role in this. And we do see very promising developments with many project announcements for renewable hydrogen-based steel. Also, we see progress in other technologies that could enable the use of renewable electricity directly via electrolysis let's say, to decarbonize the steel sector. The demand for steel is growing, and as I mentioned, let's say, to come towards a circular economy where you use over the decades the steel you produced and you recycle it could lead into almost fully circular economy where you always have to replace the steel that basically disappears over time in the cycle because of let's say, material efficiency gaps. But that's actually what we see. The use of green hydrogen to decarbonize iron ore and using in the arc furnaces renewable energies is the direction that we see in this G20 report on steelmaking and steel circularity that we produced for the Indian G20 presidency in 2023. Thank you.
Awesome. No, really great, Roland. And you know, again, I'm thinking about, you're walking us through everything from the blue economy to global offshore wind to the transport sector to circular steel. You tied it all together with systemic innovation. You have a lot going on. The news I know you've been involved in terms of the G7, in terms of tour in Italy and the environment ministers meeting. Roland, what else have you been up to? Because it seems like you've had quite a busy several weeks here.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ira. Yes, IRENA supported since the beginning in January the Italian presidency on the G7, specifically here on the climate and energy working group. And IRENA prepared in the past 4 months for the minister meeting in Turin last week on the 29th and 30th of April, 3 reports which we launched at the ministers meeting. So the first report was related to the tripling of renewable energies as it was, let's say, agreed in the G20 presidency of India last year, but also there has been a pledge at COP28 in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, where 140 countries basically signed the pledge to triple the renewable energy generation base, and also to double basically their energy efficiency, and double their energy efficiency. And as we in the G7 presidency of Japan last year, we discussed with the G7 that they launched a commitment in the G7 communique in Sapporo that they would like to increase jointly their renewable energy targets to 1 terawatt solar and to 500 gigawatt offshore wind. We basically looked now in the Italian G7 presidency into the possibility how we can support as IRENA this to achieve those objectives, and also to look into the tripling of renewable energies that has been agreed under the G20 presidency of India, and how certain adjustments are needed in this context to basically harmonize the G7 targets and the G20 targets, and how this can be achieved. Italy has requested IRENA to support in the context of the Italian G7 presidency 2024. The request focus on providing recommendations on how the G7 may support accelerated and successful energy transitions globally, addressing the most pressing issues in basically 3 comprehensive reports. So first, how the G7 can support the achievement of global target to triple renewable power generation capacity by 2030, as proposed by the COP28 presidency, with support from IRENA and also the Global Renewable Alliance. Secondly, how can the G7 collaborate with African partners on energy transitions that are inclusive and maximize the local value on the continent? The recommendation should focus on meeting the region's objectives tailored to local context and created most values for the countries in the region. Thirdly, how can the G7 support the implementation of priority enabling measures, policies, enabling technologies and infrastructure and supply chains, but also skills and capacity development to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors? So mainly here, iron and steel, chemicals, petrochemicals, road, freight, aviation, and shipping, with global impact to accelerate the decarbonization of the respective sectors. So what were the recommendations to the G7 on materializing the level of ambition for renewable power deployment aligned with COP28 pledge? So we see from this tripling report is that the tripling goal is ambitious but achievable. However, we see that urgent action is required to strengthen the existing policies and infrastructure expansion to avoid missing the goal. So the goal of tripling renewable power capacity by 2030 is challenging but achievable. A global tripling goal does not imply every country will need to triple renewable power capacity, but individual countries face different starting points and national circumstances, resulting in different contributions that may be more or less than a tripling. However, despite this record, a new capacity additions in 2023, those of onshore and offshore wind, hydropower, geothermal, and bioenergy for power all did not increase at the pace required to meet the global tripling goal. The world can still meet the goal, but it requires urgent action to strengthen existing policies that have a proven track record, to introduce new support policies in some markets and ensure key enablers for the tripling of renewable power capacity goal are also scaled, notably grids, financing, and storage. On this last point, IRENA recommends that the G7 considers a storage target, whereby depending on national circumstances, we see that 1 to 2 megawatt of electricity storage is added for every 10 megawatt of renewable power capacity implemented by 2030. Meeting the tripling goal will also deliver increased energy security, economic prosperity, local jobs and value creation, and lower climate health costs as you would have in the case of using further on fossil fuels. On the second report that we provided as support to the Italian G7 presidency on the African energy transition, we see here that the G7 can support the African goals, amplifying the African-owned initiatives, key collaboration and partnerships that we see is enhancing the power sector infrastructure and enabling the access to finance, expanding the energy access and supporting the productive use of energy, effectively managing the critical minerals for the energy transition on the African continent, and also strengthening the institutional frameworks for the building of the institutional capacity of the continent. What are the roles that IRENA can play? So IRENA can monitor the public and private finance flows to renewables and supporting technologies, support the enhancing the bankability of projects and mobilize resources, continue to support the continental power sector master plan development process. So IRENA has a mandate from the African Union Assembly to build up over the 5 African power pools an integrated renewable energy market in Africa, but also to provide a platform for partnerships like APRA. APRA is a Kenyan-led initiative that IRENA supports, where we basically focus on 6 to 7 countries for the time being, that we help in the energy transition from building up the renewable energy generation up to, let's say, achieving more energy access in Africa. So still 600 million people in sub-Sahara Africa have not yet access to sustainable forms of energy, but also helping some of the African countries to come into productive uses of renewable energy, creates great opportunities for the collaboration of the African continent with the G7 countries. And last but not least, leverage the near and universal membership of African countries of IRENA to provide tailor-made institutional capacity building, and also including here the NDCs, the national determined contributions. On the last report that is related to the G7 key recommendations of IRENA to accelerate the decarbonization of the hard-to-abate sectors, there are, let's say, the key messages from the hard-to-abate sector reports are: it is clear that direct electrification and indirect electrification via green hydrogen and its derivatives will be the main pathway to decarbonize this so-called hard-to-abate sector. Therefore, the hard-to-abate sectors are a major pull for massive renewable electricity demand that will mobilize investments that would be aligned with the COP28 tripling target, and it would also link to our let's say G7 tripling report here that I just presented. The energy transition needs to evolve from a silo energy sector planning approach towards a cross-sectoral planning approach, as the decarbonization of the hard-to-abate sector will need energy plants generation, grids, pipelines aligned with plans from other economic sectors, such as transport, airports, create new commodity trade flows, economic and educational skills, and also job creation is an important point to mention here. Speed up the commercialization of innovative technologies like electro vehicles, electric boilers and furnaces, green hydrogen-based steel and synthetic fuels is crucial to avoid the infrastructure lock-in by continuing in investing in a fossil fuel infrastructure, particularly in emerging and developing countries, where most of the deployment will happen in the decades to come. So here is clearly a link also to the work we did in the Africa report for the G7. Bioenergy, also to mention, has an increasing role today, not only as direct source of energy, biofuels, but also as a source of biocarbon, molecules for synthetic fuels with green hydrogen, need to exploit the synergies between bioindustries and green hydrogen derivatives production. Development aid money would be instrumental for infrastructure projects like grids, ports, airports, pipelines that should be close to the industry hub in developing countries, which do not attract at the moment much private investments, but which are at the moment usually public money funded. So this is a quite extensive summary of what we have delivered here for the G7 presidency of Italy in the working group on climate and energy, and summarizes also many aspects that are important for the global energy transition in let's say, what can the G7 do for Africa? How can the G7 support the tripling pledge that is an outcome of the COP28 in Dubai? And also, last but not least, how can the tripling of renewable energies also be used to accelerate the decarbonization of the hard-to-abate sectors? Thank you very much, Ira.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, it's an extremely comprehensive summary, a comprehensive list of things to get done. Obviously, there's a lot going to be happening in the coming years as we get to these milestones. But we started off, when I was originally reading the bio to this show, again talking about energy access and security, sustainable development, economic and social resilience, climate-proof future, and again, all held together by innovation that you and your team are championing. So I'm extremely impressed. Again, you have a lot to do. I wish you the best with all this and your team as you continue to bring these programs, because there's a lot there. But it's exciting to see it broken down and ultimately a strategy and plans put behind each of these tributaries towards these goals. So I'm excited. I'm wishing you the best with this, Roland. again, for everybody who's going to be listening to this particular episode of the show across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on our YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Dr. Roland Roesch, Director, Innovation and Technology Center, International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA. Roland, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us, educate us on all these topics for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything that you do there at IRENA with your team. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create this better tomorrow via these initiatives. It's a really great story. I'm going to continue to follow you, and hopefully we can do a follow-up maybe next year to see how some of this has all panned out. So really great having you on the show.
Thank you very much, Ira, for providing this opportunity to present part of the work we are doing at IRENA and here in Bonn in the Innovation of Technology Center of IRENA. I think that was a very interesting discussion also for me. And last but not least, IRENA stands ready to support its membership in the global energy transition and to provide support in the use of renewable energies and the implementation of renewable energies globally. Thank you very much.
Outstanding.